Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Doherty.
And I'm Karen Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Grief Ladies podcast. I'm Karen here with Kelly, and today we are going to welcome our guest, Kera Sanchez. Here, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in and tell everybody who you are, read your bio. Kera is a secondary educator, editor-in-chief of Get Griefy Magazine, and certified grief and resilience expert recognized as Talk Death's 2025 People's Choice Grief Educator of the Year. So, Kera, thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we're very excited. So this week we are going to focus on the letter F, which is for finding. And as we say, that's kind of the point where people may start to think, okay, what now? Who am I? Identity stuff. Where do I go from here?
Well, thank you, Kera, for being here. We're excited to have you and excited to talk about Get Griefy, which Karen and I are both members of and have done a couple of things in the magazine. So tell us a little bit about what Get Griefy is and how it got started and your story.
Sure. Yeah. So Get Griefy Magazine is a magazine clearly created out of loss. I actually unexpectedly lost my mom. She died in 2022. It was a very sudden and intense situation that I was in. I was actually in the NICU with my youngest daughter. She was like 5 days old. I was just actually getting to hold her for the very first time when I got the phone call that my mom had died on her Italian vacation. And it really sent me into a grief spiral and pretty much imploded my entire new motherhood experience. So I feel like, yes, I grieve and I'm grieving the loss of my mother, but I'm also grieving the fact that, the first 2 years of my daughter's life is just a complete blur. And, grief really has a way of affecting your memory and just your mood, and you have a fog over you at all times. And so I think now that I'm kind of out of the fog, I look back at that time and I think, wow, like there's so much more to grieve besides the fact that I lost my mom. I miss her every day, and there isn't a day that goes by where I wish I could just pick up the phone and call her. But I've come to realize that grief is just so much more than the loss of a human life. There's just so many secondary losses and other things that roll into it. And so one of the things that I felt for me helped me during the most acute part of my loss was being creative, utilizing my hands, because otherwise I would sit and spiral and ruminate on all the things that I could have said to my mom, things that I wish I would have said to my mom. And so, that was for me an outlet and a way for me to take my grief and do something productive. And, lo and behold, I started to make connections with people online, and I realized that creativity piece and channeling that pain into purpose, I was not unique in any circumstance. There's so many incredible people out there, practitioners, authors, podcasters, people who create subscription boxes, like you name it, it exists out there to try to help people with their loss. And it kind of was one of those moments where I'm just in the shower thinking about all of these inspiring stories, but they rarely get told on the world stage. Unless it's like some type of viral moment or involves a celebrity, grief doesn't really get touched on. And so it was right there and then that I realized I wanted to start a magazine. And so that's literally what I did. I got out of the shower. I still had wet hair. I cracked open my computer and I just started writing. And I wrote my very first letter from the editor that kind of laid out my intention of the magazine, which was to talk about grief and loss in a way that was approachable, that was digestible, something that was colorful. And, for a grieving heart, you need stimulation of things that are going to inspire you and make you feel seen in your loss. And so the magazine very much, ranges from stories of people who just simply want to be witnessed, to share their grief story, but it also includes ladies like yourself who are kind of experts in the field and are able to provide actionable steps for people who are struggling with their grief, and just everything in between. So it's very much a hodgepodge of griefy things, but it's not sad. It's inspirational. And I feel like I've designed it for people who are determined to not let the grief and the loss ruin their life. It's for people who they know it's going to be hard, and there's going to be a lot of work and steps ahead, but we're still living. We're still living. And so that's the goal, is to bring these people together and find community in some of the tough things that we're inevitably going to live through. All of us, we're all going to face it. So let's do it together.
Yeah. I think it's a hard balance sometimes, because I know for a lot of people that I work with, they'll say, there's so much out there, and you can go onto Facebook and there's a lot of different groups and forums. And while on the one hand it can be very comforting, okay, I'm not alone, other people are going through this too, but if it is all people just sharing the sadness and the hardship and the hopelessness, that becomes a very difficult place to be. And it starts to work against the idea of support. It's no longer feeling supportive. It's feeling like, here's all these people, nobody's doing well. And if that's what I think the population of grief
Yes.
looks like, how am I going to fare here? So it sounds like you're trying to, which I think Kelly and I do also, bring a light to it
Mm-hmm.
as well, so that it's like, absolutely, we're being very real about this. We're not pretending, that any part of this is easy, but maybe it doesn't have to be, like you said, like the end for anybody in terms of what the rest of their life can look like after this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, everybody talks all the time where they'll be like, I don't know how you're doing it. And when I talk with my clients about it, we always say, what other choice do we have? Right?
Yeah.
We have to continue to live. Some of us, a lot of the women I work with a lot of moms. And so they still have other children. They still have to be a parent. They still have to be a spouse. They still have these other identities and these other roles. And it's about, how can all of that come together while also still honoring their grief and not pushing it under the rug. And so it's a balance. But I think the reality is, we don't have any other choice but to keep moving forward. And I love what Karen always says, it's about moving forward with love rather than pain.
Yeah.
And so you've taken your own loss of your mom and you're moving forward with this love and this amazing way to honor her and
Mhm.
to continue to celebrate her. And so, we're talking about F today, and finding. And finding, I think, is multiple layers to us. It's about, how do you move forward? Who are you now? And also, like, how do you stay connected? And so before we got on, you shared a little bit about how your whole world has been changed because of your
Uh-huh.
mom's death. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Looking for a grief community that actually feels supportive, not overwhelming? We built one. The Grief Ladies community on Facebook is a private, free space where you can connect with others who are navigating life after someone they love has died. Inside, you'll find weekly prompts, practical tools, conversations that feel real, not sugar-coated, and a place where your person is honored. If you want steady support and a community that understands what your days look like right now, come join us. Search the Grief Ladies community on Facebook or tap the link in our bio.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it goes way back even prior to my mom's death. My mother-in-law also, she passed away the year before my mom did. She had cancer. And so I think that kind of slowly started the wheels turning in both the trajectory of my husband's life and my life. We both kind of hit a wall where we realized that the roles we were currently fulfilling at work were no longer working for us, and it didn't feel authentic to who we were as people. And so my husband, at the age of 36, decided to rejoin the military. He was in the military when we first got married over a decade ago. But yeah, he rejoined. And so at that point, I had to decide what I wanted to do, because I was going to be moving to a new state. Do I switch my certification over? Do I start looking for new jobs and a new school? My past school that I was working at for almost 15 years. I was working as a Spanish teacher for 13 of those years. And then the past 2 years, I had stepped into an admin role. And while I know that I was good at my job, I found myself at work doing things that were related to this magazine and to this grief. And I just couldn't peel myself away from it. And I just realized that this wasn't something that necessarily aligned with maybe my true purpose anymore. And so I think there's a lot of grievers out there, especially people who I'm connected with the magazine. Again, this experience isn't unique. They realize, okay, the job that I'm doing, real estate, marketing, et cetera, all of these different career paths, they've decided to leverage that and turn it into something that also applies to grief. And yeah, for me, I realized how much grief has, although it's imploded my life, it's allowed me to sort through all of the different pieces of my life and discard of the ones that, okay, this no longer fits. And this is what I need to make more time for. And this moving forward is who I want to be, because I think grief is, allows us to have this great perspective that, whoa, okay, yes, life is temporary. And not only are other people around me also going to die one day, but so will I. And I don't want to waste my precious time here doing something that I'm forcing myself to do. And so I think for me, now that I'm almost 4 years kind of away from the initial grief incident, so much of my life has changed, evolved, and pivoted as a result of the grief. So yes, of course it's terrible and it feels the worst, but there are some things that can come out of it as well that are very profound. And if you look at it through the right lens, it can be a positive in your life. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So Kelly and I both, we work with a whole different population of people, and a variety, I should say. But I think we also each kind of have people we work with most frequently. For me, I'm most often working with people who either lost a spouse or a parent. And I find a parent loss especially seems to bring up some of those questions like, what am I doing in my career? And, do I like where I'm living? And do I like how I'm spending my day to day questioning relationships? All of those other things. You just, maybe think about our own mortality, like you said, in a different way. And I think some of it stems from the fact, too, that when we initially have a loss, sometimes we just stop caring about things. Like we lose interest and,
yes,
there's that whole pullback and there's like the negative side of that. But then I think we start to really what it does more is that it allows us to almost kind of laser focus on what does matter,
yes,
which is the other side of it, because losing interest in things sounds terrible, but it's like, no, maybe it's just creating the space for the things that really are important. And that doesn't happen right away, as you've seen, but it's definitely something that comes down the road. So, tell us a little bit as the magazine, you have like kind of the origin story, but how is it built? What are the different components to it? How is it,
sure.
functioning at this point?
So what's really exciting is that this issue that's currently coming out, it actually launches tomorrow. So today that we're recording this is the 19th of March, but as of the 20th of March, the latest issue of Get Griefy is going to be released. And this is the first time that we've done a niched down issue. So typically it's anyone who wants to participate. It's all different types of grief, but this one specifically is for the girls. And I was actually inspired by Dr. Jessica Zucker. She is the woman who wrote I Had a Miscarriage as well as Normalize It. And both of her books really touch on the different forms of grief that women face in their lifetime. And again, initially, yes, the great loss in my life was my mom. But then since then, I've suffered a miscarriage and um, I have this new identity crisis a bit as a military spouse who's just had to uproot her life and move somewhere new and kind of have to rebuild my support system. And, for a year while my husband was away, I had to watch my kids solo and doing so while every night they're crying for their dad. And like, that's just another type of grief that I think people just are quick to kind of overlook because it's not like he's gone forever. He's just gone for an extended period of time. Right. And so I've come to realize that as women, there are so many things that we're kind of expected to carry, and there's not really room at the table to talk about it in a way that doesn't feel like, oh, like poor me. And so I wanted to create an issue where women can talk about infertility and miscarriage and infant loss and what that means for themselves as a mom and how they see themselves. For women who can't have children or decide not to have children, what that legacy means for them. Um, People who have identity crisis in the middle of their life and kind of wondering what's next, breakups, divorces, there's just so many different types of grief, aging, um, that one day we look in the mirror and we don't recognize ourselves, right? And so providing the space and the platform for women to boldly tell their stories, but also share not just their story, not just like a trauma dump, but their insights and their lessons learned from those things. um, that's the power in it. And so I don't know, I'm just really excited for this issue and what can come from it. And, I think that niching down and kind of coming up with something thematic moving forward is important to do because people need to feel seen in whatever it is that they're living. And so that's kind of the goal, is to not only provide real stories from everyday people, but then also have people who are literally experts in the field providing advice and insights and yeah, everything in between. So it's really going to be a powerful issue and I'm super excited for it. So
That's a good idea.
Well, at first, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing about your loss with us. And I was literally just training therapists a couple of hours ago, and I was talking about miscarriage. And I
mhm,
really believe it's a disenfranchised grief. We don't give it enough attention or recognition of how difficult it is and how hard it is, and how many women go through it.
yeah.
And so I'm grateful to hear this because I also work with a lot of moms who have had stillborns.
Mhm,
And so there isn't, there's some supports out there, but not nearly enough.
yeah.
And, even if they go on to have their rainbow baby, doesn't mean that their grief is gone now. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So it sounds like a really powerful episode. So you're talking about community, right? And bringing people together and knowing that they're not alone on their grief journey. And so what kind of recommendations would you give somebody trying to find that for themselves?
Um I think that, community is built through vulnerability. And so if someone is seeking that community, they also have to understand that they need to feel ready to also maybe share a bit about what they've gone through. And so um that's a tricky thing, is that not everyone's always ready for that. And so I'm not saying that it's impossible to find community without sharing, your whole story, but at least finding a way to talk about it, I think, is important. And I would also say that, I'm trying to think what else. I mean, I agree that the internet can be a really powerful place for these types of conversations, but again, Karen, to your point, you need to be mindful of the types of conversations that are occurring in these communities. And if it's just one giant trauma dump and there's not a ton of, I don't know, positivity involved, that makes it really, really hard to be involved in that community. That's a dark space to be in. And so, by no means am I suggesting that you are forced to find a silver lining or spin your loss into something profound or positive, but just being mindful and checking in with what it is that you're consuming and what types of communities you're involved in, I think is important. And taking inventory of the type of conversations that are being had. Um, it needs to be balanced. There needs to be a balance there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the way Kelly and I refer to it, we kind of call it like the culture of progress. And
mhm,
that's sort of what we're trying to do and encourage, is that, it's not to force or push or rush anybody, but always with sort of a forward momentum
Mhm.
being the goal, knowing that there's things that pause or, make us take a step sideways, maybe even feeling like we're taking a step back. Um, but trying to really focus on that progression. Because a lot of times that's happening anyway, just in the ways that we're adapting and adjusting,
Yeah.
along the way. But I think that idea of the community through vulnerability, I absolutely love that. That's such a great phrase and concept. I think vulnerability is really hard for people. I mean, we hear about this and people say it in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's people saying, "Oh, I have a hard time accepting help." I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people saying that they're afraid that they're a burden, to their family or to their friends, or that I just can't keep, saying the same things to the same people. And what starts to happen is that I think people do withdraw. They may initially following their loss kind of step out into the world a little bit, spending time with friends, extended family, and then maybe they start to feel like this isn't the place for me, and then they kind of pull back a little bit. But I think some of that is the fear of showing their grief to other people, and they don't feel safe or comfortable to do that.
Yeah. I think another idea also just came to me, and it's also important to engage with people who are in different stages or phases of their grief.
Mm,
So, for example, I had lost my mom the summer of 2022, and I found myself engaging with someone who also had lost their mom, but 2 years prior. And so kind of watching and following in their footsteps and knowing what to anticipate, but also I almost look to that person as a mentor, right? But then it's also important to kind of pay it forward and engage with someone that's new in loss as you move forward, because one, it does feel incredibly purposeful to help someone else that was once in a situation that you were in, but it also gives you little reminders along the way of how far you yourself have come.
mhm.
And so I think that is also important, is your circle shouldn't just be the people that are in the same type of loss as you. It should be people that, the timelines are a little bit different, but maybe it's also just a different type of loss, because then it expands your perspective. So I think that is also very important when it comes to community, in just creating an overall greater, um, I don't know, understanding of grief, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think our tendency is to focus on what is different. Our
Mhm.
timelines are different. Our loss is different. Our relationships were different. And it is true that those things do need to be honored. But the more we're focusing on our differences, actually in grief or otherwise, the more disconnected we're going to be.
Yeah.
So that's why I do try to talk about that in my groups in terms of like the commonalities, because there are a lot. I mean, there's the experience, while it is so different, there's so many things. You're kind of talking about the secondary losses.
Yep.
That's something, in one way or another, every griever is going to experience the loss of the person and the things they lost because they're not here. The
Yep.
signs and symptoms, of exhaustion or losing focus, all of that. So I think that's really something we want to encourage people to focus on too. So they're not feeling like I'm so different. I'm the only one that feels this way. Because that's a terrible feeling. That's what can make it so isolating.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you ready to take the next step on your grief journey with real tools and compassionate guidance? The Grief Ladies are launching a brand new workshop series based on their signature grief GRIEF framework. 5 trail markers to help you find your footing after your loss: grounding, rebuilding, interacting, evolving, and finding. Each workshop focuses on one trail marker, guiding you through practical steps to move from surviving to living again, all in a space that's honest, supportive, and real. Led by grief experts Kelly Doherty and Karen Arnold, these workshops combine decades of experience with tools you can start using today. Visit griefladies.com to explore the upcoming workshops, because you don't have to climb this mountain alone.
And I love what you're really talking about it is benefit finding, right? When we're working on finding meaning in our grief, and obviously that's different for everybody and what it is, but benefit finding sometimes is as simple as saying like, I now know how to show up for someone else who's grieving,
Yes.
right? And I love that with my clients when they're like, oh, I'm now able to be there for her. If this had happened before my loss, I wouldn't have ever shown up like I am now. But now I know. I know what she needs or what is helpful, and I can step out of my comfort zone and maybe be there. And and I think sometimes it's about expanding our comfort zone. It's not about stepping out. It's just our comfort zone is getting bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just, when we're able to find even those small little benefits, to know that I now know what to say or not to say to somebody grieving, like it's okay to look for those. I mean, obviously, Kira, my story is also similar to yours. My mom died, and that's what's prompted me on this journey. And so obviously finding meaning for me in grief is very easy, right? I do it every day of my life. But, sometimes it doesn't have to be something huge like creating a magazine or becoming a
Yeah.
grief counselor, right? It can sometimes be just those small things.
Yeah.
And, and how to be there for somebody else to build that community. And I love what you say is, once you've kind of made that progress and to be able to be there for somebody else. Well, so now we talk about celebrating their life. And so one of the big things that I find with grieving individuals is they kind of can get stuck on the death. They can get stuck on the ending. But the reality is that's only a small portion of most people's life, right? And so being able to celebrate and honor our loved ones and remember all the good and also keep that connection with them. And so I'm curious, how do you celebrate your mom's life?
Oh man, I feel like living like my mom is one of the best things I can do to honor her. She was very spontaneous, and it was really hard for her to say no to things. Like if something was on the table, she she would go. And so I feel like for me, I wasn't always like that. And so trying to expand myself and take advantage of opportunities when they come. And even if it feels uncomfortable or scary, I think about the fact like, well, what would my mom do? Or what would my mom say? And she would say, heck yeah, let's go. And so that is just something that I try to instill in myself, but also in my kids. And yeah, also just drinking a margarita. My mom loved margaritas. So
Well, Kira, I'm curious because you shared that you were in NICU when you got
yes,
the call.
yes.
So obviously, your daughter never got to meet your mom.
So this is the craziest part of the entire story. So I went into labor a full month early, and this was during like COVID era protocol. Um, when they admitted me into the hospital, they did like a nasal swab for both me and my husband, and we were both testing positive, even though like we had no symptoms of COVID. And so they would not let my husband into the hospital, so he wasn't allowed to be there. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? I have this birth plan. Like, I don't want to do this alone. And they're like, well, if you can find somebody that doesn't have COVID, they can accompany you. And my mom did not have COVID. So she was there the day that my daughter
Oh,
was born. And the next day, my husband tested negative, and so he called the hospital and like, "Can I come now?" And they're like, "Yes, but your mother-in-law then needs to leave." And so, you know, they had a moment in the hallway where it was just like a changing of the guard. He comes in, she leaves, and my mom was contemplating canceling her trip, and I was like, "Mom, we're stuck here anyway. Like, we're not even allowed to leave. I'm in quarantine." My daughter was also in quarantine, so we were separated. I wasn't even allowed to hold her. And yeah, the day that I was finally able to hold her, it was day 5. Um, that is the day that I got the call that my mom on her trip had passed in her hotel room. So I don't understand how the universe works, but part of me cannot help but believe that, I don't know, this was part of the plan and I was supposed to do something like this to help people
mm.
with grief. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe that's just my delusion speaking, but it's a very interesting timeline. And yeah, so technically my mom met my daughter, but very
Oh, I
briefly.
love that. So
Yeah.
how do you share with your kids about her?
Um, so actually, one of the members of the Small Business Collective had created for me this memory album of my mom, and it's absolutely stunning. Shout out to Shoebox Albums. But it's a really great photo album, and it really encapsulates my mom's personality. And that's something that I let my daughters kind of pull out and look at pictures of her from time to time. Um, and just, we still incorporate both my mom and my mother-in-law in part of our conversations. And, oh, like, your grandma Abby loved this, or, oh, grandma Laura, she's been here before. And so just like trying to continue to bring them up in conversation, I think is something that we still try to do. So
I love that. I feel
yeah.
like that's what we've did with my my nieces and nephew. And so it's just never been a thing. Like it's just, we talk about Grandma Eileen, and I think not everybody does that. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing
Yeah.
that for your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. And like you said, like it's that kind of the meaning finding, and sometimes that's all we can feel that we could do.
Yeah.
Maybe again to sort of regain some sense of things making sense again, and trying to make it make sense. But um I think, one of the things that we like to do as we, wrap up each podcast is to invite people to try something different. We kind of talk about like small changes, pivots, things that, we kind of talked about, like perspective that would make a little bit of a difference for them, especially if they're feeling stuck or not sure about what's next. And as Kelly said, doesn't always have to be, big things or big movements. But what is something small that you would say to somebody who's listening right now that they could try or start even today that would help move them in a different direction?
Sure. I mean, this is going to be a shameless plug, but I do believe that looking through the magazine would provide them some solace and some comfort and feeling a little less alone in the things that they've experienced, but then also expand their perspectives and understanding of what grief could look like. We also make it a point. This is something new that we started, but we are hosting um, monthly open houses that allow the general public, our readership, to just have an understanding of some of the members of our small business collective that have started grief inspired small businesses, to kind of hear their story and see what they've built as a result. And I think that this is great for anyone who is just curious about, maybe they feel a pull or a tug of like, okay, maybe I do want to write a book, or maybe I do want to start a podcast or something of that nature, um, to just hear how other people have allowed grief to work through them and how they are utilizing grief to create something for the world. And so just attending those conversations and hearing straight from the horse's mouth, straight from other grievers, how they're doing that, I think is important. And, because it's a live session, they also have the option to ask questions, which I think is great too. So yeah,
Yeah.
we try to provide programming, we try to provide resources and just open it up for what people need. And I think that helps. So
Well, that's a big part of it. People not knowing that the resources exist or how to get to them and find
mhm,
them. So,
mhm.
So,
Yeah.
Kira, I like to buy the magazine because I like the physical copy. And so I always buy a couple, and I leave one like in my office, and then I leave one in the waiting room. And so now I don't really have any left because somebody always was like, "Can I take this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." Like, because they love it. They're really enjoying it. And they'll be like, I'll come out and they'll be like, "Oh," yeah, sharing about something they read in it. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
And
That's
it is
really
making a
what I
difference.
envisioned. I
Mhm,
envisioned that, like, practitioners having it in their office. So thank
mhm,
you. Thank you for bringing that to light.
mhm.
well, so Kira, how can people find the magazine? How can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So we are at getgriefymagazine.com, and on our website, they'll be able to find the links to both the print copy and the digital. Digital is always 100% free. And so that was something that was very important to me when I started the magazine, is to ensure that as many people had access to the magazine as possible. And I didn't want cost to be a barrier for them. So um, that's always available for free. And the print is just fun, especially for the people that are involved. They are sharing their vulnerabilities with the world. And for many of them, it feels like very monumentous. Like, I'm in a magazine. And so providing the print, I also think is just, um, it's so humbling to just know that there's people out there that feel seen and excited about something that was really hard for them. And seeing their own growth through the situation, I think is just, it's priceless. So yeah, the print is available for anyone who wants it. It is print on demand. So, yeah, you just go on Amazon, but again, all of the links are on the website at getgriefy.com. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Good. Well, Kera, thank you so much for being here today. Kelly and I are both very, very big fans. I know we were very excited to have this chance, to talk to you today and to spread the word and, let more people know about what you're doing. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh my goodness. No, I was telling you ladies earlier that I'm just the ringleader and you guys are the stars of the show, and I'm bringing all these resources together in one spot. And so it's been such an honor to connect with so many inspiring and intelligent, insightful individuals. So I'm just excited to be here.
Oh,
So.
Well, thank you for what you're doing for grieving individuals. Also, thank you for what you're doing for all of us as business owners and connecting all of us and allowing us an opportunity to be able to share our stories in your magazine. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on The Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.